Sarah Martinez walked through the crowded military base cafeteria, her worn combat boots making soft sounds on the polished floor. Her uniform was clean but showed signs of years of service. The fabric had faded slightly, and there were small patches where tears had been carefully mended. At 38, she carried herself with quiet dignity, though her shoulders seemed to bear an invisible weight. The cafeteria buzzed with conversation from younger soldiers, fresh-faced recruits, and seasoned officers. Sarah picked up a tray and moved through the serving line, nodding politely to the kitchen staff who had grown familiar with her routine. She always chose the same corner table, away from the main flow of traffic, where she could eat in peace and observe the organized chaos around her. As she settled into her usual spot with a simple meal of grilled chicken and vegetables, Sarah overheard fragments of conversation from a nearby table. 3 young soldiers, probably in their early 20s, were discussing the upcoming military exercises scheduled for the following month. "I heard they're bringing in some of the older personnel to help with logistics," said Private Johnson, a tall young man with closely cropped blonde hair. "Probably just to push papers and handle supply chains." His companion, Corporal Davis, laughed softly. "Makes sense. Got to find something useful for the washed-up ones to do. Can't have them just sitting around collecting paychecks." The third soldier, Private Reed, glanced around nervously. "Maybe we shouldn't talk so loud about this stuff. You never know who's listening." "Come on, Reed," Johnson continued, his voice carrying a hint of arrogance that came with youth and inexperience. "It's not like we're saying anything wrong. Everyone knows that after a certain age, soldiers lose their edge. It's just biology. Reflexes slow down, stamina decreases. The military has to find desk jobs for people who can't handle field work anymore." Sarah continued eating methodically, her expression unchanged, though something flickered briefly in her dark eyes. She had heard similar conversations countless times over the past few years. The assumption that age automatically meant inability was something she had grown accustomed to, even if she never quite accepted it. Davis leaned forward conspiratorially. "I heard Martinez over there." He gestured subtly in Sarah's direction. "Used to be in some kind of special unit. But that was like 15 years ago or something. Now look at her, stuck doing inventory management and equipment checks." "Special unit?" Reed asked, his curiosity piqued despite his earlier caution. "Yeah, but who knows if that's even true," Johnson replied dismissively. "You know how these old-timers like to tell stories about their glory days. Probably just regular infantry back when standards weren't as high." Sarah took a slow sip of her coffee, the bitter liquid providing a moment of grounding. She remembered when she was their age, full of confidence and quick to judge those who had come before her. The irony wasn't lost on her that she now sat on the other side of that equation. The conversation at the nearby table shifted to other topics: weekend plans, complaints about training schedules, and gossip about relationships on base. Sarah finished her meal in silence, collected her tray, and walked to the disposal area. As she passed the young soldiers' table, one of them looked up briefly, offering a polite nod that she returned with equal courtesy. Outside the cafeteria, the afternoon sun cast long shadows across the base grounds. Sarah made her way to the supply depot where she spent most of her working hours. The building was a large, utilitarian structure filled with carefully organized equipment, supplies, and documentation systems that kept the base running smoothly. Her supervisor, Staff Sergeant Williams, was a decent man in his 50s who treated her with professional respect. He understood the value of experience and reliability, even if others might overlook it. When Sarah arrived, he was reviewing requisition forms at his desk. "Martinez, good timing," Williams said without looking up. "We've got a shipment of new communication equipment coming in tomorrow. I need you to oversee the inventory process and make sure everything matches the manifest." "Of course, Sergeant," Sarah replied, settling at her workstation. The desk was organized with military precision, forms in neat stacks, pins aligned perfectly, and a computer terminal that she navigated with practiced efficiency. The work was important, even if it wasn't glamorous. Every piece of equipment that passed through the depot would eventually support soldiers in the field. Sarah took pride in ensuring that when someone needed night vision goggles, medical supplies, or communication devices, they would be available and in perfect working condition. As the afternoon progressed, Various personnel stopped by to collect supplies or submit requests. Most interactions were brief and professional. Sarah had developed a reputation for being thorough and reliable, someone who could be trusted to handle requests efficiently without unnecessary complications. Around 4 o'clock, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson arrived with a small group of visiting officers. Sarah recognized him as someone who had been at the base for about 2 years, a career officer who maintained high standards and expected the same from everyone under his command. "Williams, I'm giving these gentlemen a tour of our logistics operations," Thompson said. "They're from the Pentagon, evaluating supply chain efficiency across different installations." Williams immediately stood and began explaining the depot's organization and procedures. Sarah continued working at her terminal, aware of the conversation, but focused on completing a complex equipment allocation that required careful attention to detail. One of the visiting officers, a middle-aged man with silver hair and the bearing of someone accustomed to authority, asked detailed questions about inventory tracking and quality control procedures. His questions demonstrated a deep understanding of military logistics that went beyond casual interest. "Your systems appear quite sophisticated," the officer observed. "How do you ensure accuracy when dealing with high-volume transactions?" Williams gestured towards Sarah's workstation. "We have experienced personnel who understand the importance of precision. Sergeant Martinez there has been handling our most complex allocations. Her error rate is essentially zero." The silver-haired officer glanced in Sarah's direction briefly before returning his attention to Williams. "Experience is certainly valuable in logistics operations. How long has she been with this unit?" "About 3 years now," Williams replied. "Before that, she had various assignments. Always gets the job done right." Sarah felt the weight of being discussed, but maintained her focus on the screen in front of her. She was accustomed to being evaluated based on her current role rather than her complete background. It was simpler that way, and it avoided complicated questions that might make people uncomfortable. The tour group moved on to examine other areas of the depot. Sarah heard their footsteps and voices fading as they explored the warehouse sections where larger equipment was stored. The conversation shifted to discussions about modern inventory management systems and the challenges of maintaining readiness across multiple time zones. As her shift neared its end, Sarah completed the allocation project and prepared her daily reports. The work provided a sense of accomplishment, even if it wasn't the type of challenge that had once defined her career. There was satisfaction in knowing that her attention to detail contributed to the smooth operation of the base. Williams returned from the tour, looking pleased. "The Pentagon folks seemed impressed with our operation," he told Sarah. "They particularly liked our accuracy statistics. You should feel good about contributing to that." "Thank you, Sergeant," Sarah replied, saving her work and organizing her desk for the next day. "The new communication equipment arrives tomorrow morning?" "That's right. Should be here by 0800. I'll need you to coordinate with the technical team to make sure everything gets properly tested and cataloged." Sarah nodded and gathered her personal items. As she prepared to leave, Williams added, "Martinez, I want you to know that your work here is appreciated. I know it might not seem as exciting as some other assignments, but what you do matters." "I understand, Sergeant. See you tomorrow." The walk back to her quarters took Sarah through the main section of the base, where evening activities were beginning to wind down. Soldiers were finishing dinner, heading to recreational facilities, or preparing for evening duties. The base had a rhythm to it that she found comforting, predictable, orderly, and purposeful. Her quarters were small, but comfortable, reflecting the practical needs of someone who had learned to travel light and value function over decoration. A single bed, a desk, a small closet, and a window that looked out over the training fields. Personal items were minimal: a few books, some photographs in simple frames, and basic necessities arranged with characteristic neatness. Sarah changed into civilian clothes and sat at her desk to write in a journal she had maintained for years. The practice helped her process the day's events and maintain perspective on the larger arc of her life. Tonight, she wrote about the conversation she had overheard at lunch and her thoughts about how people perceived her current role. The words came slowly at first, then, with greater fluency as she explored her feelings about aging in a profession that often valued youth and physical capability above experience and judgment. She wrote about the balance between accepting limitations and fighting against assumptions, about finding purpose in quieter contributions, and about the occasional loneliness that came with being misunderstood. Outside her window, the base settled into its evening routine. Security lights came on automatically as darkness approached. In the distance, she could hear the sound of soldiers conducting night training exercises, voices calling coordinates, vehicles moving across training grounds, and the occasional burst of simulated weapons fire. These sounds were familiar and somehow reassuring. They represented the continuation of military tradition and the ongoing mission to maintain readiness. Sarah understood that her role in supporting that mission had evolved, but it remained meaningful to her in ways that others might not immediately recognize. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the silver-haired officer from the Pentagon who had visited that afternoon. Something about his questions and manner had seemed familiar, though she couldn't place exactly what it was. Perhaps it was simply the recognition of someone who understood the complexity of military operations beyond surface appearances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and responsibilities. The communication equipment delivery would require careful coordination and attention to detail. There would be routine tasks that needed completion and probably more conversations among younger soldiers who saw her as a relic from an earlier era. Sarah had learned to find satisfaction in doing her job well, regardless of others' perceptions. She knew that respect was earned through consistent performance rather than dramatic gestures. Her current role might not generate exciting stories, but it contributed to the larger mission in ways that mattered, even if they weren't immediately visible to casual observers. The base grew quieter as she settled into bed, though it never completely slept. Somewhere, guards walked their posts, communications operators monitored radio traffic, and duty officers maintained watch over the ongoing operations that kept the military functioning around the clock. Sarah fell asleep to these familiar sounds, unaware that her carefully ordered world was about to change in ways she could never have anticipated. The next morning arrived with the crisp efficiency that characterized military life. Sarah was at the supply depot by 07:30, 30 minutes before the communication equipment was scheduled to arrive. She had reviewed the manifest the night before and prepared checklists to ensure every item would be properly accounted for and tested. Staff Sergeant Williams arrived shortly after her, carrying a steaming cup of coffee and looking alert despite the early hour. "The technical team should be here soon," he informed her. "Specialist Chun and his crew will handle the actual testing, but I need you to coordinate the paperwork and make sure nothing gets lost in the shuffle." "Everything's ready, Sergeant," Sarah replied, indicating the organized workspace she had prepared. "I've cross-referenced the manifest with our current inventory to identify any potential conflicts or storage issues." The delivery truck arrived precisely on schedule, followed by a smaller vehicle carrying the technical testing team. Sarah watched as uniformed personnel began unloading carefully packed crates containing sophisticated communication equipment that would eventually be distributed to various units across the region. Specialist Chun, a young man with an engineering background and an enthusiastic approach to new technology, greeted Sarah professionally. She had worked with him on previous equipment deliveries and appreciated his thorough testing procedures. "Morning, Sergeant Martinez," Chin said, consulting his tablet computer. "Looks like we've got some really advanced stuff today. New encrypted communication systems, satellite uplinks, and some gear I haven't seen before. Should be interesting to evaluate." Sarah began the methodical process of checking each crate against the manifest while Chin's team prepared their testing equipment. The work required patience and attention to detail, qualities that experience had taught her were more valuable than speed or flash. As they worked, other base personnel stopped by on various errands. The supply depot served as a hub for equipment needs across multiple departments, and Sarah had become familiar with the regular customers and their typical requirements. Around mid-morning, Lieutenant Colonel Thompson arrived again, this time accompanied by the same silver-haired Pentagon officer from the previous day. They appeared to be continuing their evaluation of base operations, moving through different departments and observing procedures. "How's the equipment processing going?" Thompson asked Williams, who immediately provided a status update. "Right on schedule, sir. Sergeant Martinez has everything organized, and the technical team is running their standard evaluation protocols. We should have everything cataloged and ready for distribution by this afternoon. The Pentagon officer observed the operation with apparent interest, asking occasional questions about testing procedures and quality control measures. Sarah noticed that his questions demonstrated a sophisticated understanding of military communication systems that went beyond general administrative knowledge. These new communication systems represent significant technological advancement, the officer commented to Thompson. Proper testing and deployment will be crucial for field effectiveness. Sarah continued her work, but found herself paying closer attention to the conversation. There was something about the officer's tone and the specific nature of his observations that seemed familiar, though she still couldn't identify exactly what it was. Specialist Chin approached her workstation carrying a particularly heavy crate. Sergeant Martinez, this one contains some specialized equipment that I'm not completely familiar with. The documentation is pretty technical. Would you mind taking a look? Sarah examined the paperwork and immediately recognized specifications for advanced battlefield communication systems designed for special operations use. The equipment was significantly more sophisticated than standard military communication gear, requiring specialized training for proper operation and maintenance. This is high-level stuff, she told Chin quietly. You'll want to be extra careful with the testing protocols. These systems are designed for environments where failure isn't an option. Chin nodded seriously, understanding the implications. Have you worked with this type of equipment before? Some time ago, Sarah replied carefully. The principles are similar to other systems, but the tolerances are much tighter. I'd recommend running extended stress tests to make sure everything performs within specifications. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Private Johnson and Corporal Davis, who had been sent to collect standard communication equipment for their unit's upcoming training exercise. Sarah recognized them from the previous day's cafeteria conversation, but maintained her professional demeanor. We need headsets and field radios for 24 personnel, Johnson said, presenting a properly completed requisition form. Training exercise starts Monday morning. Sarah reviewed the paperwork and began gathering the requested equipment from the designated storage area. The work was routine, but she performed it with the same careful attention she applied to everything else. While she worked, Johnson and Davis conversed casually near her workstation. Did you see the Pentagon brass walking around again? Davis asked. Wonder what they're really looking for. Probably just checking to make sure we're not wasting taxpayer money, Johnson replied. Though honestly, I'm not sure what they expect to find impressive about supply operations. It's not exactly cutting-edge military work. Sarah continued counting headsets and checking serial numbers, but she noticed that the silver-haired officer had moved closer and appeared to be observing the equipment distribution process. His attention seemed focused on her work methods rather than the conversation between the younger soldiers. Davis lowered his voice slightly. I still think it's weird that they have someone like Martinez handling this stuff. I mean, she seems competent enough, but wouldn't it make more sense to have someone with current training on the latest equipment? Maybe they figure experience counts for something, Johnson conceded. Though experience with obsolete systems isn't necessarily helpful with modern gear. The Pentagon officer stepped closer to Sarah's workstation, ostensibly to examine one of the communication devices she was preparing. Sergeant Martinez, isn't it? He said quietly. Yes, sir, Sarah replied, maintaining her focus on the equipment checklist. You seem quite familiar with these communication systems. Have you worked extensively with battlefield communications? Sarah paused briefly, meeting his gaze directly for the first time. I have some background in communications operations, sir. It helps with understanding equipment requirements and testing procedures. The officer nodded thoughtfully. I imagine it does. He studied her face for a moment longer, then moved away to continue his observation of the depot operations. Johnson and Davis finished collecting their equipment and departed, still discussing their theories about Pentagon inspections and personnel assignments. Sarah completed the paperwork for their requisition and returned her attention to the incoming communication equipment. Specialist Chun had begun testing one of the advanced communication systems and was running into technical difficulties. The equipment appeared to be functioning normally, but he was having trouble interpreting some of the diagnostic readouts. Sergeant Martinez, could you take a look at this? Chun asked, indicating his testing display. The system seems to be operating correctly, but these diagnostic codes don't match anything in the standard manual. Sarah examined the display and immediately recognized the diagnostic pattern. The system is running an integrity check on its encryption protocols, she explained. Those codes indicate it's verifying secure communication pathways. It's normal operation for this type of equipment, but it's not covered in the basic technical manuals. How did you know that? Chen asked, impressed by her quick diagnosis. Experience with similar systems, Sarah replied simply, though the answer didn't fully capture the depth of her background with such equipment. The Pentagon officer, who had been observing from a distance, approached again. That was quite an astute analysis, Sergeant Martinez. These particular diagnostic protocols are not widely documented. Where did you encounter similar systems? Sarah felt a moment of internal tension. The honest answer would lead to questions she wasn't prepared to discuss in this setting. Various assignments over the years, sir. Communication systems share common principles across different applications. The officer studied her for a longer moment, his expression thoughtful. Indeed they do. Tell me, what's your assessment of this equipment's capabilities compared to older communication systems? The encryption is significantly more sophisticated, Sarah replied carefully. Range and reliability have improved substantially. The systems are designed for use in hostile electronic environments where standard communications might be compromised. You speak as if you have direct experience with hostile electronic environments. Sarah met his gaze steadily. I speak from technical knowledge, sir. The specifications indicate the equipment's intended use. Lieutenant Colonel Thompson had been listening to this exchange with growing interest. Sir, if you don't mind me asking, is there something specific you're looking for in our personnel evaluations? The Pentagon officer continued looking at Sarah for another moment before turning to Thompson. I'm always interested in finding personnel with unexpected capabilities and experience. Sometimes valuable skills are not immediately apparent from current job assignments. Sarah returned to her work, but she could feel the weight of continued observation. The morning's routine had taken on an undercurrent of tension that she couldn't quite identify. The officer's questions seemed to probe beyond casual interest, as if he were trying to confirm something specific. Specialist Chun had moved on to testing other equipment, but he continued to consult with Sarah when he encountered unfamiliar diagnostic patterns. Her ability to interpret the technical readouts was proving valuable in ensuring proper equipment evaluation. Sergeant Martinez, Chun said during a brief break in the testing process, I have to ask, what was your background before you came to supply operations? You know a lot more about advanced communication systems than most people in logistics. Sarah considered her response carefully. I had various assignments that involved working with different types of equipment. Over time, you pick up knowledge about how systems function and what to look for when evaluating performance. It wasn't a complete answer, but it was accurate as far as it went. Her background included experiences that would be difficult to explain without revealing classified information and raising questions about why someone with her qualifications was working in supply operations. The afternoon progressed with continued equipment testing and cataloging. Sarah maintained her professional focus, but she remained aware of the Pentagon officer's periodic attention to her work. His interests seemed to go beyond general observation, as if he were trying to piece together information about her background. Around 1,500 hours, Williams approached her workstation with an unusual request. Martinez, I need you to review some of these technical specifications, he said, indicating a stack of documentation that accompanied the communication equipment. There are some details that don't match our standard procurement categories. I need someone who understands this type of gear to figure out how we should classify it for inventory purposes. Sarah reviewed the specifications and immediately recognized that the equipment included several systems designed for special operations use. The documentation had been deliberately kept general to avoid revealing specific capabilities, but the technical requirements indicated sophisticated battlefield applications. This equipment is designed for specialized operations, she told Williams quietly. The classification should reflect its intended use for units that require enhanced communication security and reliability in challenging environments. Can you prepare the appropriate documentation for the inventory system? Williams asked. I want to make sure we categorize everything correctly for future reference. Sarah began working on the classification documentation, drawing on her knowledge of military communication systems to ensure accurate categorization. The work required understanding both the technical capabilities of the equipment and the administrative requirements for proper inventory management. As she worked, the Pentagon officer approached her workstation once more. This time, his manner seemed less casual and more purposeful. "Sergeant Martinez, I'd like to ask you a direct question," he said quietly, ensuring their conversation wouldn't be overheard. "Your knowledge of these communication systems goes well beyond what would be expected from supply operations experience. I'm curious about your actual background." Sarah paused in her work and looked up at him directly. "Sir, my background includes various assignments that exposed me to different types of equipment and operational requirements. I've tried to apply that knowledge constructively in my current role." "I see," the officer replied thoughtfully. "And you're satisfied with your current assignment?" "I try to do good work wherever I'm assigned, sir." The officer nodded slowly, as if processing information beyond what she had directly stated. "That's a commendable attitude, Sergeant. Sometimes the most valuable people are those who focus on doing their job well regardless of recognition." Sarah sensed there was more behind his words than casual observation, but she wasn't sure how to respond without knowing more about his specific interests. The conversation felt like it was leading somewhere, though she couldn't anticipate the destination. "I appreciate the professional manner in which you handle your responsibilities here," the officer continued. "It's clear that your supervisors value your contributions." "Thank you, sir." The officer seemed about to say something more when Lieutenant Colonel Thompson approached, carrying a folder of documents that appeared to require the Pentagon officer's attention. Their conversation shifted to administrative matters related to the base evaluation, and Sarah returned to her classification work. As the afternoon drew to a close, the communication equipment testing was nearly complete. Sarah had successfully categorized all the incoming systems and prepared the necessary documentation for inventory management. The work had proceeded smoothly, despite the unusual level of attention from visiting personnel. Specialist Chin finished his final equipment tests and approached Sarah's workstation to review the results. "Everything checks out perfectly," he reported. "Thanks for your help with the diagnostic interpretations. I learned a lot today about advanced communication systems." "Glad I could help," Sarah replied, organizing her paperwork for final review. The technical manuals don't always cover every situation you might encounter in the field. As the workday concluded, Sarah prepared to secure her workstation and complete her daily reports. The incoming equipment had been successfully processed, tested, and cataloged for distribution. Despite the unusual circumstances surrounding the Pentagon inspection, the operation had proceeded according to standard procedures. Williams approached as she finished her end-of-day routine. "Excellent work today, Martinez. The Pentagon folks seemed impressed with our efficiency and attention to detail. I think we made a good impression." "Thank you, Sergeant. The new equipment is ready for distribution whenever the requesting units need it." As Sarah prepared to leave, she noticed the Pentagon officer standing near the depot entrance, apparently concluding his conversation with Lieutenant Colonel Thompson. He glanced in her direction briefly, and she had the distinct impression that their interactions during the day had been more significant than they appeared on the surface. Walking back to her quarters, Sarah reflected on the day's events. The Pentagon officer's questions and observations seemed to suggest knowledge about her background that went beyond what would be available through standard personnel records. His interest in her technical knowledge and experience felt like more than casual curiosity. The feeling that something was developing beneath the surface of routine operations followed her as she settled into her evening routine. Change was coming, though its exact nature remained unclear. For now, she could only wait and see what tomorrow would bring. The following morning brought unexpected changes to Sarah's routine. Instead of her usual arrival at the supply depot, she received orders to report to the base commander's office at 0800 hours. The message provided no additional details, leaving her to wonder if the summons was related to the previous day's Pentagon inspection or some other matter entirely. Colonel Patricia Henderson commanded the base with a reputation for fairness and efficiency. Sarah had interacted with her only briefly during her 3 years at the installation, primarily during routine personnel reviews and ceremony preparations. The colonel's office reflected her no-nonsense approach to leadership, functional furniture, military maps on the walls, and a desk organized with mathematical precision. When Sarah arrived at the specified time, she was surprised to find the silver-haired Pentagon officer already present, seated in one of the chairs facing the colonel's desk. He wore the same thoughtful expression she had observed during his depot visits, but now his attention was focused entirely on her. "Sergeant Martinez, please come in and have a seat," Colonel Henderson said, gesturing to the chair beside the Pentagon officer. "I believe you've met General Morrison during his evaluation visit to our base." General Morrison. The rank explained the deference she had observed from other officers and the depth of his questions about base operations. Sarah took the offered seat, maintaining her composure despite growing curiosity about the purpose of this meeting. "Sergeant Martinez," General Morrison began, "I've been reviewing your personnel file in detail since our conversations yesterday. It makes for interesting reading, particularly the sections that have been classified or redacted." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, but kept her expression neutral. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand what you're referring to. Your current assignment shows 3 years in supply operations with exemplary performance ratings," the general continued. "Before that, there are several years of assignments that are listed only as classified operations with no additional details available through standard channels." Colonel Henderson leaned forward slightly. "General Morrison has security clearance that allows him access to information beyond what's typically available in personnel files. He shared some very interesting details about your background." Sarah waited, unsure how to respond to information about her own classified history being discussed by others. The careful boundaries she had maintained around her past were apparently being crossed by someone with sufficient authority to access restricted records. "According to the files I've reviewed," General Morrison said carefully, "you served with the 75th Ranger Regiment for 4 years, followed by selection and service with Delta Force for an additional 6 years. Your operational record includes deployments to Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, and several locations that remain classified." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Sarah had spent 3 years avoiding discussions of her previous assignments, finding it easier to let people assume she had held conventional military roles. The careful omission had become a form of protection, allowing her to focus on current responsibilities without the complications that came with her actual background. "Sir, those assignments ended several years ago," Sarah replied carefully. "I've been focused on contributing effectively in my current role." "Indeed," the general said, nodding slowly. "And, according to your service record, you didn't retire or transfer voluntarily. You were medically separated following injuries sustained during a classified operation in 2019. Colonel Henderson looked between the general and Sarah with obvious surprise. "Medical separation?" "Sergeant Martinez, your current physical fitness evaluations show no limitations or restrictions." Sarah felt the careful privacy she had maintained beginning to unravel. The injuries that had ended her special operations career were not visible in routine military settings, but they had been sufficient to disqualify her from the physical demands of her previous assignments. The injuries were primarily neurological, General Morrison explained. Traumatic brain injury resulting from an explosion during a high-priority operation. The medical evaluation determined that while Sergeant Martinez retained her cognitive abilities and technical knowledge, the injury created limitations that made her unsuitable for continued special operations service. "I recovered fully from the brain injury," Sarah said quietly. "The medical restrictions were based on potential risks rather than current capabilities." "Yes, I've reviewed the medical documentation," General Morrison replied. "The restrictions were indeed precautionary. However, they effectively ended your career in special operations and led to your eventual assignment to conventional supply operations." Colonel Henderson was clearly processing this revelation about one of her personnel. "Sergeant Martinez, why didn't you mention your special operations background when you arrived at this base?" Sarah considered her answer carefully. "Ma'am, I found that discussing previous assignments sometimes created complications. People either had unrealistic expectations or assumed I was dissatisfied with conventional duties. It seemed simpler to focus on doing good work in my assigned role." "Understandable," General Morrison said. "But it also means that your considerable skills and experience have been significantly underutilized for the past several years." The general reached into his briefcase and withdrew a folder containing what appeared to be official documents. Sergeant Martinez, I'm here because the military has need of personnel with your specific background and capabilities. There's a situation developing that requires someone with advanced communication systems expertise and special operations experience. Sarah felt a familiar tension building in her chest. The conversation was heading toward an offer or assignment that would disrupt the carefully structured life she had built around routine and predictability. Sir, I appreciate your confidence, but my medical restrictions remain in place. I'm not cleared for special operations duties. Actually, that's not entirely accurate, General Morrison replied, consulting the documents in his folder. I've arranged for a comprehensive medical reevaluation by specialists who understand both your original injuries and the current requirements for the assignment I have in mind. He handed her a set of orders. You're to report to Walter Reed Medical Center next week for updated medical and psychological evaluations. The examining physicians will have complete access to your medical history and current assignment requirements. Sarah scanned the orders, recognizing the official format and noting that they superseded her current assignment to the base. Sir, what kind of assignment requires this level of medical clearance? I can't provide complete details until we know the results of your evaluation, the general said. However, I can tell you that it involves training and advising Allied forces on advanced communication systems and tactical operations. The work would utilize both your technical expertise and operational experience. Colonel Henderson looked thoughtful. General Morrison, I have to say that losing Sergeant Martinez would impact our supply operations significantly. She's become integral to our efficiency and accuracy. I understand, Colonel, and I appreciate the quality of her service here. However, the military has invested considerable resources in training personnel like Sergeant Martinez. When situations arise that require their specific capabilities, we have an obligation to utilize those resources effectively. Sarah studied the orders more carefully, noting that the medical evaluation was scheduled to begin in 5 days. The timeline suggested that whatever situation required her involvement was developing rapidly and couldn't wait for extended bureaucratic processes. Sir, can you provide any additional information about the nature of this potential assignment? She asked. General Morrison chose his words carefully. Allied forces in a strategically important region are experiencing sophisticated electronic warfare attacks that are compromising their communication systems. They've requested assistance from personnel who understand both the technical aspects of advanced communications and the operational requirements for maintaining effectiveness under hostile conditions. The description triggered memories of similar challenges Sarah had faced during her special operations deployments. Electronic warfare had become increasingly sophisticated, requiring countermeasures that went beyond standard communication protocols. The assignment would be temporary, General Morrison continued. Probably 6 to 12 months, depending on the situation's development. You would be working with a small team of specialists, training Allied personnel, and helping them develop effective countermeasures. Sarah felt conflicted emotions pulling her in different directions. Part of her was intrigued by the prospect of returning to meaningful operational work that utilized her full capabilities. Another part appreciated the stability and predictability of her current assignment, free from the stress and danger that had characterized her previous career. I need to think about this, sir, she said finally. Of course, General Morrison replied. However, I should mention that this opportunity represents more than just a temporary assignment. If you perform well, and the medical evaluation clears you for expanded duties, there would be possibilities for permanent reassignment to positions that better match your qualifications. Colonel Henderson looked at Sarah with what appeared to be newfound respect mixed with concern. Sergeant Martinez, I had no idea about your background. I feel like we haven't been utilizing your capabilities appropriately. Ma'am, I've been satisfied with my work here. It's been good to contribute in a stable environment where I could focus on reliability rather than high-stakes operations. Nevertheless, the colonel continued, knowing what I know now, I think General Morrison's offer deserves serious consideration. Your country invested significant resources in training you for special operations. If there's an opportunity to use that training constructively, it might be worth pursuing. General Morrison gathered his documents and prepared to leave. Sergeant Martinez, I'll arrange for your temporary reassignment to begin after the medical evaluation. Whether you ultimately accept the overseas assignment will depend on the medical results and your personal decision. Sir, what happens if I decide not to accept the assignment, assuming I'm medically cleared? You would return to your current position with no negative impact on your record. However, I hope you'll consider the opportunity seriously. Your skills could make a significant difference in helping Allied forces maintain communication effectiveness against sophisticated threats. After General Morrison departed, Sarah remained in Colonel Henderson's office to discuss the transition of her current responsibilities during her absence for medical evaluation. Sergeant Martinez, I have to ask, the colonel said. Are you satisfied with your current assignment, or would you welcome a return to more challenging duties? Sarah considered the question carefully. Ma'am, I found satisfaction in doing good work and contributing to the mission in whatever capacity I'm assigned. My previous career ended because of circumstances beyond my control, and I've learned to appreciate the value of stability and routine. But if you had the opportunity to return to work that fully utilized your training and experience, I honestly don't know, ma'am. The medical separation wasn't just about physical limitations. The psychological impact of transitioning from high-intensity operations to conventional duties was significant. I've spent several years finding equilibrium in a different type of service. Colonel Henderson nodded understandingly. I can appreciate that transition would be challenging. However, from an outside perspective, it seems like the military hasn't been getting full value from your capabilities. If there's an opportunity to change that while serving important national security interests, it might be worth the personal risk. Sarah left the meeting with instructions to arrange coverage for her supply depot responsibilities and prepare for the medical evaluation at Walter Reed. The orders in her hand represented a potential turning point that she hadn't anticipated and wasn't sure she wanted. That afternoon, she worked with Staff Sergeant Williams to transition her ongoing projects to other personnel. Williams was surprised by her sudden reassignment, but professional enough not to ask detailed questions about matters that might be classified. You'll be missed around here, Martinez, Williams said. I hope everything works out well for you, whatever this new assignment involves. Thank you, Sergeant. I'll be back in a couple of weeks, one way or another. As word of her temporary reassignment spread through the supply depot, Sarah received several informal comments from colleagues who had worked with her over the past 3 years. The general sentiment was surprise at losing her expertise, though most people assumed it was a routine administrative transfer rather than anything significant. Specialist Chen stopped by her workstation during the afternoon. I heard you're getting reassigned temporarily, he said. I wanted to thank you for all the help with technical evaluations. You taught me a lot about advanced communication systems. I'm glad I could help, Chen. Keep asking questions when you encounter unfamiliar equipment. That's how you build expertise over time. Will you be coming back to the depot? I'm not sure yet. It depends on how things develop with the new assignment. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing the medical evaluation orders and trying to process the day's revelations. General Morrison's knowledge of her classified background had been more complete than she expected, suggesting that her Special Operations Service was being reviewed at high levels for reasons beyond casual interest. The prospect of returning to operational work that utilized her full training was both exciting and concerning. She had found peace in the routine nature of supply operations, where success was measured by accuracy and reliability rather than life and death decisions under extreme pressure. Yet she couldn't deny that part of her missed the sense of purpose and challenge that had characterized her previous career. The opportunity to help Allied forces develop effective countermeasures against sophisticated electronic warfare represented exactly the type of meaningful work that had originally attracted her to military service. The medical evaluation would determine whether she was physically and psychologically capable of returning to demanding operational assignments. The results would influence not only her immediate future, but potentially the entire trajectory of her remaining military career. Sarah spent the evening organizing her personal affairs and making arrangements for her absence from the base. Whether the medical evaluation led to overseas assignment or return to supply operations, she wanted to be prepared for either outcome. As she prepared for bed, Sarah reflected on the unexpected direction her life had taken in just one day. The careful privacy she had maintained around her background was no longer possible, and Decisions were approaching that would determine whether her future involved continuing the quiet satisfaction of conventional duties or returning to the high-stakes world of special operations. The silver-haired general had recognized something in her that others had overlooked, seeing potential rather than limitations. Tomorrow would begin the process of determining whether his assessment was accurate and whether she was ready to embrace the challenges and opportunities that came with it. The medical evaluation at Walter Reed Medical Center proved to be the most comprehensive examination Sarah had undergone since her original injury in 2019. Over 3 intensive days, specialists conducted neurological assessments, psychological evaluations, and physical fitness tests designed to determine her readiness for demanding operational assignments. Dr. Emily Richardson, the neurologist who led the evaluation team, had extensive experience with traumatic brain injuries in military personnel. Her assessment was thorough and methodical, utilizing advanced imaging technology and cognitive testing that hadn't been available during Sarah's original medical separation. Sergeant Martinez, I've reviewed your entire medical history and conducted the most current evaluations available, Dr. Richardson explained during their final consultation. Your recovery from the traumatic brain injury has been remarkable. Current testing shows no residual cognitive limitations or neurological deficits that would prevent you from performing demanding duties. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and apprehension. Doctor, the original medical board found that the injury created risks that made me unsuitable for special operations. Has something changed? Our understanding of traumatic brain injury recovery has advanced significantly in recent years, Dr. Richardson replied. Additionally, your case involved what we now recognize as a relatively mild injury with complete recovery potential. The original medical board was appropriately cautious given the available knowledge at the time, but current evidence supports full clearance for operational duties. The psychological evaluation conducted by Dr. Michael Torres had been equally comprehensive, assessing her emotional stability, stress tolerance, and readiness to return to high-pressure operational environments. Your psychological profile indicates excellent coping mechanisms and emotional resilience, Dr. Torres informed her. You've successfully adapted to significant career changes and maintained stability in challenging circumstances. I see no psychological barriers to resuming operational assignments. The physical fitness evaluation had been the most familiar part of the process, resembling the demanding standards she remembered from her special operations training. Despite 3 years of conventional duties, her fitness levels exceeded the requirements for the proposed assignment. Armed with medical clearance that exceeded her expectations, Sarah returned to the base to meet with General Morrison and discuss the overseas assignment in detail. The meeting was scheduled for the day after her return, giving her time to process the evaluation results and consider her decision. The night before the meeting, Sarah received an unexpected visitor at her quarters. Colonel Henderson stopped by to discuss the situation personally, away from the formal environment of her office. Sergeant Martinez, I wanted to talk with you privately before you meet with General Morrison tomorrow, the colonel said, settling into the single chair in Sarah's spartanly furnished room. I've been thinking about our conversation and the implications of your background. Ma'am, I appreciate your concern about my situation. I've done some research into the type of assignment General Morrison described, Henderson continued. Electronic warfare countermeasures and communication system security are becoming critical issues for our allies in several regions. The work you'd be doing could have strategic importance beyond the immediate tactical benefits. Sarah had been reflecting on the same considerations. I understand the potential significance, ma'am. I'm just not certain I'm ready to return to that type of environment. Can I speak frankly about something? Henderson asked, her tone becoming more personal. When I learned about your special operations background, I realized that we may have done you a disservice by allowing you to remain in routine supply operations for 3 years. Ma'am, I've been satisfied with my work here. It's provided stability and purpose. I don't doubt that, and your service here has been exemplary. But I've been a military officer for 22 years, and I've seen what happens when highly trained personnel are underutilized for extended periods. Sometimes the safe choice isn't necessarily the right choice for long-term career satisfaction. Henderson paused, choosing her words carefully. You have training and experience that could make a real difference in important operations. If you pass up this opportunity, you might not get another chance to use your capabilities fully before retirement. Sarah appreciated the colonel's directness and evident concern for her career development. Ma'am, what would you do in my situation? Honestly, I'd probably be terrified of returning to high-stakes operations after 3 years of routine duties. But I'd also recognize that avoiding challenge might lead to regret later. The medical evaluation cleared you for the assignment, which suggests the risks are manageable. Their conversation continued for nearly an hour, covering practical considerations like career progression, personal growth, and the potential impact of accepting or declining the assignment. Henderson's perspective as a senior officer provided insights that Sarah hadn't fully considered. The following morning, Sarah met with General Morrison in a secure conference room at the base headquarters. The general was accompanied by a woman in civilian clothes who was introduced as Dr. Jennifer Walsh from the Defense Intelligence Agency. Sergeant Martinez, congratulations on receiving full medical clearance for operational duties, General Morrison began. Dr. Walsh will brief you on the specific details of the assignment, assuming you're interested in proceeding. Dr. Walsh opened a classified briefing folder and began explaining the situation that had prompted the assignment request. Allied forces in Eastern Europe are experiencing sophisticated electronic warfare attacks that are compromising their communication systems during joint training exercises. The attacks appear to be testing countermeasures in preparation for potential future conflicts. She displayed technical diagrams showing the types of interference patterns and jamming techniques being employed. Sarah immediately recognized several of the electronic warfare signatures from her previous operational experience. The Allied forces have requested assistance from personnel who understand both the technical aspects of advanced communications and the operational requirements for maintaining effectiveness under electronic attack, Dr. Walsh continued. Your background makes you uniquely qualified for this type of advisory role. General Morrison leaned forward. Sergeant Martinez, this assignment would involve working with a small team of specialists to train Allied communication personnel and help them develop effective countermeasures. The work would be conducted primarily at training facilities, with limited exposure to actual hostile environments. Sarah studied the briefing materials, noting that the electronic warfare techniques being employed were more sophisticated than what she had encountered during her previous deployments. Sir, what's the timeline for this assignment? Initial deployment would be 6 months, with possible extension based on the situation's development and mission requirements, the general replied. You would be working primarily with NATO allies who specifically requested American expertise in this area. Dr. Walsh added additional technical details about the communication systems and countermeasures involved. The assignment would require Sarah to draw on both her special operations experience and her recent work with advanced communication equipment. What level of operational risk is involved? Sarah asked, focusing on practical concerns about the assignment environment. Minimal direct risk, General Morrison replied. You would be working at secure training facilities with Allied personnel who have been cleared for cooperation with American advisors. The primary challenge would be technical and instructional rather than operational. Sarah considered the information carefully. The assignment represented exactly the type of meaningful work that had originally attracted her to military service, utilizing her full range of training and experience in support of important strategic objectives. Sir, I have one significant concern about accepting this assignment, she said finally. I've been away from operational environments for 3 years. My technical knowledge is current, but my practical experience with high-pressure situations may not be at the level required for advising Allied forces. That's a valid concern, the general acknowledged. However, the assignment includes a 2-week refresher training program before deployment. You would work with current special operations personnel to update your skills and rebuild confidence in operational environments. Dr. Walsh consulted her notes. Additionally, the Allied personnel you would be training are experiencing the same challenges adapting to sophisticated electronic warfare that you would face. Your recent experience transitioning between different types of military service might actually help you relate to their situation. The offer was compelling, representing an opportunity to return to meaningful operational work while contributing to important alliance relationships and strategic security objectives. Sarah realized that declining the assignment would likely mean remaining in routine supply operations until retirement. "Sir, I'd like to accept the assignment," Sarah said, feeling a sense of purpose she hadn't experienced in several years. General Morrison smiled, apparently pleased by her decision. "Excellent. Dr. Walsh will coordinate the administrative arrangements for your deployment preparation. You'll begin the refresher training program next month." As the meeting concluded, Sarah felt both excitement and apprehension about the challenges ahead. The decision represented a significant change from the safe predictability of her recent assignments, but it also offered the possibility of utilizing her capabilities fully in service of important national security objectives. Over the following weeks, Sarah transitioned her supply depot responsibilities to other personnel and prepared for the refresher training program. Her colleagues expressed surprise at her sudden career change, though most were supportive of what appeared to be a positive development. Staff Sergeant Williams was particularly generous in his assessment of her contributions to the supply depot. "Martinez, you've made a real difference here over the past 3 years. I hope this new assignment works out well for you. If you ever need a reference or want to return to logistics work, you'll always be welcome." Specialist Chen stopped by during her final week to express appreciation for her mentorship with advanced communication systems. "I learned more about technical evaluation from you than from any of my formal training," he said. "I hope I can apply what you taught me as effectively as you did." The transition back to operational preparation proved both challenging and invigorating. Sarah found herself remembering skills and knowledge that had remained dormant during her years in supply operations. The refresher training would test her readiness for demanding assignments, but the medical evaluation had confirmed her physical and psychological capability for the work. On her last evening at the base, Sarah reflected on the unexpected path her career had taken. The silver-haired general had seen potential that others had overlooked, recognizing that her classified background represented valuable capabilities rather than obsolete experience. The young soldiers who had dismissed her as washed up couldn't have known about the specialized training and operational experience that lay beneath her routine supply operations duties. Their assumptions about age and capability had blinded them to the reality that valuable expertise often comes in unexpected forms. Sarah packed her personal belongings, preparing for the next chapter of her military career. The classified emblem that had remained hidden in her personnel file was about to become relevant again as she returned to the type of meaningful operational work that had originally defined her service. The overseas assignment would test her readiness to resume demanding duties and contribute to important strategic objectives. Whether the next 6 months would confirm her ability to operate effectively in challenging environments remained to be determined, but she felt prepared to embrace the opportunity with confidence and purpose. As she settled into bed for her last night in the familiar quarters that had provided 3 years of stability, Sarah realized that sometimes the most significant changes come from unexpected recognition of hidden capabilities. General Morrison's willingness to look beyond surface appearances and current assignments had opened possibilities she hadn't imagined were still available. Tomorrow would begin the process of returning to the specialized operational world she had left behind, armed with both the technical expertise gained during her special operations career and the patience and precision developed through years of meticulous supply operations work. The combination might prove more valuable than either capability alone, as she prepared to help Allied forces develop effective responses to sophisticated threats. The dismissive comments about washed-up personnel seemed irrelevant now, replaced by the prospect of meaningful work that would utilize her full range of training and experience in service of important national security objectives. The journey from overlooked supply sergeant to strategic advisor had been unexpected, but it demonstrated that valuable capabilities often remain hidden until the right circumstances reveal their continued relevance.